Alrighty, hopefully you came up with something that worked out. If not, don't worry about it. If you're brand new to this, I really wouldn't expect you to get it, your first time anyways. It's not a big deal. So let's go ahead and switch gears. I'm going to open up here. This is the before project folder for this particular project. As you can see, this time there's no HTML right here outside of the script tags, of course. So I decided we're going to write this HTML from scratch just so I can really describe what's happening in the HTML structure, because you have to have, now that these are getting a little bit more advanced, these projects, you have to understand what's happening with the HTML and the CSS in order to get the full picture. So for me, what we're going to first start with is, obviously we can't do anything without the HTML. So if we look at our Figma document, we're going to have an overall container that contains these 3 different slides. But even outside of that, we're going to have another parent container. So if you think of it like this, I get a big rectangle here. Let's get rid of that. We're going to give ourselves a stroke, and we'll make it red, and we'll make it thicker. There we go. So we'll say like this right here is a parent container of each of these sections. So again, that could be like this. We get this over here. Here's section 1, section 2, and of course section 3. And then we're going to have our very first element is actually going to be one that extends outside as well right here. And the purpose of this one is to get rid of a horizontal scroll bar. We'll call it outer. Okay, so let's go back, and I'm just going to say period outer for Emmett abbreviation. Just hit enter. There we go. Saves ourselves some typing. And then we're going to have that other container inside of that, and that's going to be called slider. All right, and then we have our 3 sections. So that's going to be section. And before I replicate this to the other sections, I'm going to get the markup in this section, and then we can just copy and paste that. So the first thing that I'm going to have inside of this particular section is an inner element, and kind of think of it about the relationship between these 2 elements. There's going to be an inner element here, and then I'll make that a display flex so that we can then take another element. Let me just go back to my Figma. Another element that will wrap around these 2 elements, and that will allow us to position this to the bottom essentially. So let me show you what I mean. So for inner, the first thing we'll put is the actual image, and that's going to be the fish. So fish1.png, and I'm just going to copy and paste off screen that alt. There we go, a lumafin fish. And then also a parent container around those 2 pieces of type. So this inner element will be flex, and we're going to align the items to the bottom. Or the end rather, and this image right here won't be affected by that because that will be a position absolute element. So what we're going to have here is an H1 lumafin, and then a paragraph right here. And I already have the text that ChatGPT generated for me for these fictional creatures, and that is right here. And that's all our HTML structure looks like for each one of these sections. So we'll take this section. We're going to go ahead and paste that. We only have to change this to fish 2. I will go ahead and modify that text in a second to make it custom. And then here's fish 3. And there we go. So I'm going to take my paragraph right here. Let's go to the middle one, fish 2. I'm just making this content custom. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. It's not a big deal. There we go. Okay. So I'll just leave these alt tags the same. It's not a big deal. This is not a real serious project. And then finally, we do have to worry about, if I come back to our Figma document, these fish. All right. So that's called fish 4 over here. That's what that looks like. And I'm just going to go outside of everything. And this is going to be a position fixed element, because these fish are just going to stay in the viewport, and we're just going to move them. So we'll just have a fish container. And inside of there, we're going to have an image source, fish4.png. We're going to put a custom data attribute, but for now, for the alt, I'm going to put animated vector fish. There we go. And then we're we're going to put a data-distance custom attribute property, and we'll put this one like at 80. And what this is going to allow us to do is to communicate this custom data attribute value, which will allow us to kind of create a parallax effect with the fish. And this is going to be tied to an X% value, I believe. So that's why I have 80 here. Some might be up to 200. Some might be like 15, something like that. So I'm going to copy and paste the rest of these from my reference code. And this is what this looks like. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And you can see they're all the same fish, all the same data distance right here. Okay, or not the same data distance, but the same data distance attribute with different values. So I'm going to go ahead and save that, and that is all that we have for the HTML. Now if I come over here to the CSS is already completed for this project because I don't want to sit there creating the CSS from scratch. We will do that in the final project, but for now this is all done. So as you can see, our outer div, which is our first one, overflow X hidden, that was its purpose. Our slider is a display flex of a 300 viewport width. Each section has a height of 100 viewport height and a width of 100%. Then our inner element, if you recall, that's the direct child of the section element. So everything's wrapped inside of this inner element. As you can see, we have our display flex align item ends, which then pushes down the content to the very bottom right here. And then we just have some other things here. Here's the fish, the big large fish, where there's 3 of them, there's creatures. Position absolute, I just changed each one to a width of 80%. And then these 3 lines right here will center that in the viewport. Additionally, we have our fish container, which is position fixed, a negative Z index because it's in the background, and then our images right here. And then I'm just using CSS instead of JavaScript to communicate the different scales and the different positions of the fish themselves. Okay, so hopefully that I know that was a lot to take in, but that is what we have so far. So if I open with live server, this is what we have, and we can't scroll down or anything right now because we took that overflow X hidden off, we took off the overflow on the X-axis on that outer element, but there are 2 other sections off to the right over here. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with the JavaScript. So as we can see, we have Linus, scroll trigger, and GSAP imported. And the first thing we need access to is a few different properties or constant the DOM elements. So I'm just going to paste those in, and those are right here. So the first one we have is our slider. So that's just a query selector. It selects our slider. Then our sections, selecting each of the 3 sections inside of the slider. And then also the fishies, as I call them, and that's selecting all the images specifically with GSAP utils to array. All right, so the first thing that we'll focus on is defining a timeline, because if you think about it, it is a timeline animation. The fish comes in, the text comes in from nowhere as well. So what we can do is say let timeline equals gsap.timeline. Defaults are going to be ease, ease right there, none. Put a comma here. And then inside here, we're going to have our scroll trigger. So we set this up, something like this up very similar to before. We're going to say trigger is going to be the slider itself. We're going to pin true. Scrub will be 2, which means like a 2-second delay after the scroll bar has been moved down or through the mouse scroll wheel. It will keep animating. And then we're going to put our end function plus equals. And I already had the code for me right there, slider.offset width. Okay. All right, so that's good right here. This code right here in and of itself won't do anything beyond what we've already seen because we're not actually creating any animations yet. So let's get the scrolling portion done here. And all we have to do is put TL2, and we're going to take our slider, and we're going to say X%. And just so before we put this in programmatically, just to show you what those programmatic values equal in the context of this type of slider where you have 3 slides, it's actually -66. All right. And if I put, well, let's just hit save and come over here. There you go. So if you pay attention exactly to where the scroll bar is, it ends right there. And that's essentially what we want. So we can see all of these sea creatures now. Okay. Additionally, outside of that, we're going to go ahead and iterate over each of our sections. So sections.forEach. We're going to do a stop and an index. And that will be right here. Okay. So what I want to do now is we want to take a look at our content, and we have a content element that's wrapped around our H1 and our paragraph. As you can see right here, here's the div class content, H1 paragraph. And again, this is the thing that's aligned to the bottom, this type right down here. Okay, and we want that to kind of come from an opacity of 0 and a Y position that's taller. So what we'll do is we're going to say timeline to, to, and, oh, actually from, sorry, come from, as I said. And we're going to say stop dot query selector. So we're scoping into that particular section's content element right here. And then inside of here, we're going to say Y% -50. We're also going to take the opacity to 0. Now here's where we define the scroll trigger. So the trigger is going to be itself. So in other words, we're going to take our stop right here, all that code, and put that right there as well. And then we're also going to have a start, left center, and then an end of center right there, center, center, and then container animation is timeline, and then scrub will be true. Okay, so if we save this, we could see now our type is coming in. Very, very cool. And so if you want to see how this is working, markers true, this kind of identifies what these values are doing with that scroll trigger. So you can see right when our ends meet, this starts to push up. And when scroller start intersects with start down here, these two elements, that's when it begins. Very nice. Okay. And then outside of that, we're going to chain another tween, and it's going to be from. So we're going to say from, and it's actually giving me the right selector right here, but the values are incorrect. So let's gut all of that from the center. And this will be a X% of 40 and a Y% of -100. That's kind of the values that I played around with that I liked. So ease, we're going to say elastic out 1, 1. Now, if this was a smaller value like 0.3, it would be a really springy animation, and it looks kind of strange. This is much more smooth and less noticeable as an actual effect. So now we could type in our scroll trigger, and again, it's going to be, the trigger is going to be itself. So trigger right there. We're also going to have a scrub of 2, and then a container animation of timeline. Actually, if we look up here, scrub 2 is already set on the timeline scroll trigger itself. I think we probably don't need that here, so let me delete that. Let's save that. Now let's refresh. Okay, so let's add that back and see if that's doing the trick. Yes, it is. We do actually need that. Okay, so refreshing, coming down. Okay, so it's not really the exact expected behavior. But what we'll do is we'll come back to this. Yeah, that looks actually, it's a little bit more exaggerated than what. Oh, okay. So I think I know one of the reasons is I wanted to make this start at the same time. Potentially that could be one of the issues. Let's shift F5. Let's go back. Okay, so before I diagnose, because that's not exactly what I want, we're going to move on to the fish background. So again, remember we created a property called fishies that grabs each of the images. And so we're going to say for each, and we're going to say fish, and the index here, our arrow function. And inside of here, it's a very simple tween. We don't even have to tie this to the same timeline. We can just do gsap to, or from rather. We'll take our fish, and then we'll give it an X% of fish.dataset.distance. That's how we get that custom data attribute. And then scroll trigger, I'm just going to say scrub and 0.3. So we're going to save it. Let's refresh. Now the fish in the background should move at different speeds. And there they go. I actually kind of like how this comes in. It kind of just comes in at a little bit more delayed than what I would probably want, but I still think it's really kind of cool and a little bit more whimsical than in the original. Here was my original. No, that actually was not my original. I'll show you my original real quickly. If I click go live on that one, you'll see another one pop up. This is the original one that I kind of showed. They kind of come in at the same time. I'm not really sure what the discrepancy is there in my code, but I'm sure it's something that's very small. But yeah, let me try putting this at that offset. We'll see if that does anything to the original, which is right here. I think they're coming in more at the same time now. Maybe. Oh, but either way, I think you get the point here, and hopefully now you kind of have a pretty solid understanding of how to tackle these horizontal sliders. Now that we're at the end of that particular chapter, we're going to be integrating one for sure in our final project. So keep out for that, and hopefully now you're pretty solid when it comes to these horizontal sliders.